Hello everyone, welcome to the final session of Resonate 2020 online. This is the economic, social and cultural value of the music industry, sponsored by Scottish Music Industry Association. I'd just like to encourage you to use the chat box on your right hand side to ask any questions that you might have or have a discussion. I'm Holly, the digital event coordinator, so ask me any questions you like as well. And now I'll just hand over to Nick Stewart, who will be leading this discussion. Nick.
Hi guys, so my name is Nick Stewart and I run a music venue in Edinburgh called Sneaky Pete's, which hopefully some of you have been to. I'm also on the board of the SMIA, the Scottish Music Industry Association, as is Caroline. Robert's doing a major research project for us and he's going to have some details about that for you later on. I'm also the Scottish coordinator for Music Venues Alliance, which is run by the Music Venue Trust. So that's all the grassroots music venues in Scotland. It's the things that used to be called the toilet circuit back in the day, but nowadays we have a lot more cultural value imbued into these places. So that's forgot on that one there. If anyone was checking sort of the brochure for this in advance, then some eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed that this panel doesn't actually go until 4:30. It goes until 4:30 in a year's time. And so therefore, I'm hoping we've got lots of material. It ends in 2021, so I'm hoping that we'll get lots of material. If we keep this going at the end of the chat, the pandemic will actually be over.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if you realized your promise to be stuck in a room with me. At least you guys are at home. As I mentioned, I'm stuck in the office for that time. That's a nice message from Bethany Anderson. That's good. Rather than have some questions specifically, I thought we would just kind of have some topics for conversation and see how chatty everyone was feeling. But I thought, since we're dividing this up into the economic, social, cultural value, what music means to people in Scotland, I wanted to start with some of the economic sort of figures. And Robert here is your man to take us into that. Robert, you're planning to do a bit of a presentation, is that right?
Yep, I've got a few slides, so let's see if I can make this work. I'm used to using Zoom.
Robert, I've introduced myself, so will you tell us a little bit about yourself and that you're not just an academic and not just handsome? What else are you?
Thank you. So I am a band called Glasvegas. I play guitar, and I am at the University of Glasgow doing a mapping project for the Scottish music industry. So I am basically mapping the industry and seeing how much it's worth. And then I'm also going to be looking at the effects of COVID on it as well, which is a new part of it.
Right.
I can't see you all just now, but I'm just trying to get this to share the screen. So hopefully this should work.
Just for a bit of a background on that one, I suppose it's very interesting that, Robert, you decided to do, oh, look at my vortex, it's amazing. You decided to do, or rather you engaged to do, a project mapping music industry in Scotland which takes, I think, over a 5-year period. And okay, so in the current context, suddenly everything feels like it's all chucked into different snapshots instead. And of course, with COVID right now, whatever you started with will not be what you ended with. But a lot of the research that you were doing turns out to have been, very timely, because actually Scotland's knowledge of how much of the UK music industry is just Scotland is in a way little known, isn't it? And
yeah, I mean, when I started the project, the basic outline was to look at the value of the economic, social and cultural value of music. When COVID happened, we had to restructure the PhD. So it's more about the economic value and the effects of COVID on that. So it was like, I guess in a way, it's kind of helped the study. It's maybe made it focus a wee bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got to be interesting to see, because the last study of just Scotland was about 2003. So it'll be interesting to see if I can do mine's better than that one.
I think the one thing that we'll probably pick up on after a bit here, which I think, before we go into it, I think is worth noting, is that, Scotland's music industry isn't separate from the UK's music industry. So, Scottish artists may be very successful, but their publisher might be based in London or Manchester or something like that. And so the interlinkage between different parts of the UK makes it very, very hard to divide. So you might say Scottish artists do well, or artists of Scottish origin do very well, or something like that. But I think it's fair to say that Scotland doesn't retain really enough talent. A lot of people move elsewhere, or for a portion of their working years, they're elsewhere as well. And I think it's an SMIA, Scottish Music Industry Association, aim is to try and have a lot more indigenous music industry going on in Scotland, a lot more talent retention, and that you can have a record label that's based in Scotland, and that can be a big deal, that you can have an artist management company here, etc. That, you know, you don't always have to move to be somewhere. And I suppose, Robert, your work mapping what exactly we have now will help to point out a lot of the need for Scotland's music industry to be indigenous and native and here.
Exactly. I mean, I guess what we're trying to do is see what parts of the music industry are underrepresented and which parts are thriving. And there is a mixture of both. There's definitely certain areas that could be improved on. And looking at things like reinvestment back into the music industry from certain sectors and stuff as well.
Can I ask you just a tiny bit about your personal experience? You know, you've been you're in a band that's done very well. Did you have difficulty having all of your career based in Scotland, out with the fact that you had to tour? But did you find that, you know, your record label is based elsewhere, that your radio plugger might have been in a different city, that sort of thing as well? Or actually, have you had quite a strong Scottish base? Is it Scottish management, that sort of thing? Yeah,
so management is actually family, so that made it a lot easier at Christmas dinners. So to be honest, we didn't really notice a difference being based in Scotland, but I know that some acts probably do. We were lucky because we were on a major, so we had like a really good team. Although there were Scottish people working for us, I mean, most of it was based in South, but we never felt the need to go down there. All the record companies come up to Scotland to see us. You know, we never had to really chase it. So I guess we were quite lucky in that respect. But I think the report that I'm going to write at the end is going to highlight certain areas that need improving. Yeah, I don't want to say what they are yet because I'm not finished, but it's quite a few.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, cool. It's really great to hear of the level of success that you've had and that you've been able to do it in Scotland. I think it's quite a strong example, actually.
Do you know what? I think the thing is, I mean, if you look at some of the Scottish acts that have been breaking through, especially rock, if you look at like Jerry Cinnamon, Lewis Capaldi, the Snuts have just signed and they're breaking through quite big. There's so many massive acts just now from Scotland that are doing it from Scotland. Whereas I think before people did tend to leave quite a lot to move away or to kind of try and find it. But it's definitely good for the Scottish economy in terms of keeping the money within the country.
That's right. I mean, Lewis has got a big thing on his dad's fishmonger business. And, you know, he's promoting Scottish businesses extensively on Instagram, and I think that matters.
Yeah.
Right, let me get out of the way of your presentation.
That's okay. So can you see this just now? This is sharing, okay? Yeah. Magic. Okay. So the new Music by Numbers report came out last week. So that is the figures for January 1st to December 31st, 2019. So what they have said is that the music industry in the UK contributes 5.8 billion to the UK economy. That's not just the money earned, but how that goes on to be spent within beyond that as well. Within Scotland alone, we generate 453 million towards the economy from music tourism. So that's basically just live music, and then the money that is spent around about live music to make those shows happen and people travel and things like that. I think that's actually down on 2018, but it's not down much. And that accounts for over 4,000 jobs. So if you're looking at what's kind of been lost since COVID hit, there's 4,000 live music jobs, music tourism jobs. In 2019, 33.7 million people attended a live event in Scotland. And by looking at the Music by Numbers report, the music creators, like songwriters, musicians and bands, composers, they were the most lucrative in terms of revenue, but that would primarily have been composers and songwriters.
Robert, can I stop you on that figure for a second? The 33.7 million people attended a live event. That's a UK figure, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm told that the average records that are sold per person, or used to be in the days when there were, you know, a lot more records and CDs, was that it was about one per person in the UK per year. So you got a lot of friends who might be buying, 30 to 100 records all the time. A lot of people not buying records. the average attendance of a live gig, 1 in 2 people have been to a gig in a year, I suppose, the average there. So there's definitely room to improve that for sure. It feels like you go a lot further.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to do was just kind of show some more specific figures. So for instance, the Hydro was number 2 on the top 200 arena venues in the world, selling over 1 million tickets and grossing over 172 million. Obviously, that's split between the different promoters within Scotland. So the top 2 promoters financially is DF and Regular. So for 2019, DF sold just under 1 million tickets and generated just under £36 million, which is insane, and that is just ticket sales. I think that does include festivals. It doesn't say on it, but I would assume that would be like transit and stuff as well. Regular music sold 235,859 tickets and generated just over £9 million. There's obviously loads of other promoters, and they generate good amounts of money, but these 2 are the biggest worth mentioning.
It's probably worth saying though that live music is quite a long tail in that there are big concert promoters putting on big shows, but there are, in Scotland especially, there seem to be a lot of smaller concert promoters putting on a lot of smaller shows. And if you go through your ticket stubs, if you still have such a thing, you look at the top above where it says the band name, it tends to have the name of the promoter. You'll find a really wide variety of promoters, especially if you go to see a really wide variety of types of shows as well. And a lot of the smaller venues where you'll go see a show will be an in-house presentation rather than having a major promoter take over the venue for the day.
Yeah, people don't even do tickets anymore. I remember when it used to do tickets, and it was quite exciting getting a ticket with like a picture on it and stuff, and it's gone. So this is the rosy picture. This is the good picture of the live kind of industry within Scotland and the UK. So then we got on to the kind of less rosy stuff. There's some predictions been made of the end of 2020. A report that just came out in October has projected that there's going to be an 81% loss in revenue across the whole UK industry. And that basically 50% of jobs are going to be gone in the live sector. So that's like 26,000 jobs, which is quite scary, to be honest. So from that same report, this is kind of the breakdown of the revenue drops between different sectors. So artists and managers are losing 64%. Promoters are losing 78.4% of revenue. Festivals are losing 90%. I mean, it's quite grim stats, and hopefully it doesn't end up being that bad. But I'm assuming for 2020 it's going to be that way because they only had 2.5 months at the start of the year.
We have to kind of view this in the context of most of these losses are in live as well. And live is an interesting story because live was absolutely the growth area of the music industry in recent years. Even last year, I think they went from £1.1 billion value to £1.3 billion value, and that's really just the value of tickets sold, as far as I know. It's not the added value that goes into the economy, which we can describe later if we want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, the thing that this isn't really taking account is things like merch. When bands sell merch and stuff on tour, there's loads of other ways that people are losing money that's probably not getting taken into account. But this is, I guess, just a picture of what's to come, which is, I kind of understand why people want to get the live music up and running again. Because there is so much money being lost. So that was a picture of how good it was before and how grim it is now, just to kind of, give us something to start talking about. So just let me take this off sharing and we can all see each other again. Hi.
Well, maybe I've got I'm going to open this out a little bit then. So with that as a bit of context then, we have Rishi Sunak telling people that the jobs are not necessarily viable in the music industry and stuff like that. And from those stats, it sort of looks that way. So who's got a counter argument for that? Who disagrees with the idea that none of our jobs are viable anymore? Singers, for instance, Nadine, you said you're actually really busy right now. How does that work?
Oh my goodness, no, of course they're viable. I think that it is a sensational industry to work in. And I think, people aspiring to work in music, it seems like this sort of dream job. And I think all of us in this chat could agree that there have been moments in our career where it has felt like a dream job. Like, it is an incredible industry. So it is so sad that the events that have not taken place this year and the things that just have not happened, and we have no plan for those things to happen again. So in my context, I run Tenement TV and also Tenement Trail Festival involved in that. So there's been lots of things that just haven't happened this year that we don't have plans for happening in 2021. So I think it's a scary place to be, but we're just trying to remain positive and be a bit more forward thinking in terms of what are we going to do in 2021 when the revenue isn't going to be there from sponsorship to put on these big festivals and stuff like that. So yeah, no, it's still viable, but I think it's seeing those figures, it's difficult to remain positive, but I am just trying to remain as positive as possible about it, really.
Has anyone here got thoughts about kind of demand? You know, like we feel like, many of us feel like, oh, well, once we get back to live shows, you know, everyone will want to come out again. Does anyone have a sense of what that's really like? Maybe Caroline, you're going to speak to something similar.
I was just going to say that I know that cash flow is king and it's the big issue. But for those who are trying to keep going, then this period, if they see it's temporary, are looking at how they can create and learn. So I've been talking to musicians who have made music during this period and issued slightly different work than they would otherwise have in a DIY basis, like you were saying, Nick, earlier. But in terms of viable jobs, I don't think that musicians think about it like that. It's something that comes out of your soul and out of your head and out of your body, and you can't help being a musician. And even people who have not done as well as Robert in Glasvegas and maybe didn't get quite signed at the time or whatever, and have gone into various other residencies, wedding bands, or just making music at their local whatever, they can't put it down. It's not, you'll still be doing it at 60. My dad is 83 and he'll still pull out his guitar and play his keyboard. Musicians it's not like a job. So I'm hoping that this time can be a time where people are developing maybe their digital skills. They're looking at broadcasting themselves digitally, looking at how they might make music from syncing, from soundtrack, working with brands, whatever. People are looking at their skill base at this time and hoping that they can still, stay alive until they can bring everything more into the model that we have been used to. But I'm also concerned about the future model. Do we have a hybridization? Is it twin track? I
mean, I don't want to take over the discussion. I'd rather make sure it's questions and stuff. But my feeling is that, the economy is all about supply and demand. It's not only about supply and demand. But, here we have, it appears to be still a very high demand. I share my office with James Bruce, who's the booker for the Usher Hall. He's booking shows into 2024 right now. Shows that Sneaky Pete's are putting on sale are selling. I had another sellout the other day. I got Green Tea Peng is £15 ticket in Sneaky Pete's. It's expensive for us. Sold out in 2 days. And the show is penciled for, I think, either May or June. And it may or may not happen. But the level of audience confidence we have is such that people will go, well, I want to get the shows. I want to come see stuff. So all we really have at the moment is a gate that's in front of supply. We know we've got musicians, the industry there. That's the supply. There's something stopping that right now, and the demand is ready to meet it. So as soon as we get the gate out of the way, the idea is all our jobs are viable because, of course, we're ready to go. And there's a huge amount of training that goes into being a musician as well. So I mean, should we retrain to be, well, what? But a lot of people are saying that there's going to be 5 million people unemployed pretty soon. I'm hearing that from some quite senior economists. So if musicians and everyone else in the music industry is going to retrain, sure, we're all really smart and we've got other skills, but we put this level of training into what we do, for which there still is a gigantic demand. Robert, have you got friends who are musicians who are thinking, well, maybe I need to be doing something else? Or, I mean, how does that work? It's temporary. Musicians already have portfolio careers anyway, right?
I know. I mean, I was thinking about that when Caroline was speaking. It's my feeling is that people who are in the arts who do things creative would do that whether they were getting paid for it or not, because that's what they do. Okay, so I think you're absolutely right. And I think sometimes that can be taken advantage of because people know that. So they know it doesn't matter if we give them money or not, because they're going to continue to do that anyway. Do you know what I mean? So people need support, but they're just not getting it, but they're still willing to wait. to be able to come back to it, because as Nadine was saying, it's just like a passion, and you enjoy what you do, and you feel lucky to do it.
It's interesting you should say about people will make art anyway, no matter what the economics are of it. And like you say, it can get taken advantage of for sure. Weirdly, I just happened to look over, and one of my favorite books is here. It's called, I wish people ask this question more often, it's called Why Are Artists Poor? And the same thing really should apply to musicians, And the conclusion, it's from a study, it's about 20 years old now, one of the conclusions was found is that to an extent, the more money that you put into arts funding, actually, a lot of the time, what you end up with is more people being involved with art who are earning less money. And one reason for this, without going around that too much, is that music and art is going to happen anyway, regardless of what the funding levels is. As soon as it's just about affordable to be a professional musician, even if you're basically in penury, people will definitely take up that option. And so it's not hard to restart the arts from that point of view. You just need to make it just about affordable to be even part of the time a musician or someone who's involved in artist management or something. I think we expect to see the industry suddenly rocketing up. As long as the demand is there, the wealth of professionals is outstanding. I think the viability question answers itself pretty fast.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, I asked a question and then I decided to answer it. I hope this isn't the way it goes from this point in. I want to talk about social for a wee bit, and we may be able to come back to some numbers sort of stuff later. I'm just going to open this one up. Scotland's got the best crowds in the world, right?
Yes, 100%. It's actually, sorry, no offence to anybody that is from London or loves London gigs, but when I was living in London, I was shocked and appalled at the difference. I went to see a gig on the Thursday night in London and came up to the Glasgow one on the Mexican day, and it was appalling, the difference. And I just think that it is unbelievable, the crowd reaction at festivals, and Transmit, Tea in the Park, at the Barras, at the Hydro. It is just outrageously good. So I think we just have such a great level of talent to also back that up. Jerry Cinnamon at Transmit, I was working for the press team at the time during that gig, and it was an electric atmosphere from the moment the gates opened. It was honestly an indescribable feeling. Yeah, I think Scotland doesn't have anything to worry about in terms of when we get back to the live gigs. The level of standard of musicians that we have is so good. I think that also what's been created during lockdown, which is something that Caroline touched on, has been incredible. Artists have used this time to be really creative and come out with great music. I am so excited about the stuff that I'm getting sent to Tenement TV. So yeah, I got really excited there. But yes, I totally agree that it's the best crowds for sure.
I think it's worth pointing out that it's not only in certain genres that Scotland gets that sort of thing as well. Scotland's crowds for classical are amazing. Terminal V is the UK's biggest dance music event, as far as I know. I think the last one got to nearly 20,000 people. Ridiculously huge event. And the standard, the level at which people are really present there, and being that kind of event, being a bit of a tea in the park sort of feeling about it, people are going absolutely mad. But if you think about Sub Club or La Chita or something, these venues have got really special, really particular atmospheres where people are just so completely engaged and involved in the music and everything that's around the music as well. Perhaps Robert, Caroline could talk a little bit about other bits of genres of music that where you think that Scotland is kind of leading it. Folk is maybe an example, but there's all sorts of things.
I think the experimental music scene is really intriguing. And I've been talking to Martin Parker, Faraz Khanesar, Andrew Osler, Fritz and Arminstrom about experimental music, and it's making music on your laptop. Dave Murray Rost and Martin kind of riff on that together. But they're doing all sorts of things. It's like a Foley artist meets experimental music, laptop kind of stuff, and electronica and noise, and using all sorts of different things. One was playing their guitar with their mobile phone, and I'm loving this kind of side of things, and that's led me into exploring things that Drake Music is doing in Scotland with helping people with disabilities and locked-in syndrome to make music and having hardware and almost a prosthetic and software interface to allow them to make music. And Michaela Magus is doing that with Music Tech Fest in Sweden and Stramatalite, and then looking at people who've got brain caps and learning to make music that they couldn't play before because the brain cap stimulation has been recorded from another musician and then placed on them, and they're able to play within hours. All of that stuff gets me really excited. So that's the kind of area. And Scotland's, is doing fine in the experimental music area. So that's my area of excitement at the moment. Maybe Robert's got another.
I love anything. Do you know what I really like just now? You Kingdom Management. See all the acts that Kingdom Management's working with. I think they're like world class. I think Lucia, especially Lucia and the Best Boys, is my favourite Scottish act, and I think she's probably going to end up going on to be massive.
Love her. I photographed her when she was first starting and helped kind of with look and feel and location and stuff. And I love her voice, so I'm really excited about where she started and what she's doing now. Yeah, it's great.
I think just for anyone who's in the room who's not familiar, so Kingdom Management, Scott, who used to manage Lewis Capaldi for many years, and he's picked up, this kind of like really cool scene of people around him. And Nadine probably know a lot of these people as well, but talking Walt Disco, who else is up in there?
There's Aaron Smith as well, who hopefully will go on to do great things in 2021. Rory James, he hasn't really launched it, but I've got big hopes for him.
Rory was in that great band Blarney Junction before.
Yes, that's right.
And also, took Hector Berserk to New York. We were talking about hip hop and Stanley Odd, and I actually love all that. And I should have mentioned that as well. That I'm really into that.
But see that point about the retention, I think it's a good time to sort of bring that back when you're talking about the likes of Lucia and the incredible artists that Kingdom are working with just now. I think like Lucia is one of the artists that actually isn't keen on going to London, and she's got the coverage. Like I think the coverage that people in Scotland are now getting with the likes of NME and the bigger titles is definitely improving. It had a bit of a lull for a couple of years, I would say, where they just weren't really picking up on the scene up here. And I think Aldi has done a good job at putting us back on the map. And people are looking towards Scotland and the smaller artists and the smaller scene and the smaller venues. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch that retention and see those artists really flourish from Scotland, but with an international sort of approach.
Do you think, Nadine and Robert and Nick, about the Scottish Album of the Year Awards lifting the level of awareness of Scottish acts? And I'm thinking about Young Fathers, and then going from Say Award to Mercury, and that was pretty impressive.
I worked on the Say Award campaign this year actually, so it was a lovely thing to be part of during this 2020 nonsense. But there was like 362 eligible submissions this year, so that is just unbelievable, and that was a record for the Say. They're approaching 10 years, and the winner of it all, going up against Lewis Capaldi on the long list, it was a young artist and a young female hip hop artist. So I just think like how exciting and lovely is it that we had like such a successful Say Award campaign this year, because it was just about celebrating artists and putting them on the stage. And I think like the Tim's Twitter listening party was amazing. That was one of the girls in the press team that sort of set all that up. And the fact that those 20 albums, or was it 10 albums, it was shortlist, got that coverage was just huge. So yeah, I hope that there has been a great increase in knowledge of those brilliant albums from the Say Award for sure.
Well, Nadine, I mean, something I wanted to get onto later, but I think I'll pull it in sort of now, is how do you, or how well do you feel that Scotland celebrates its own in the media, in social media and things like that? And something I wanted to pick up in that context was like, Lucia as an example, she's got really great, interesting, creative people around her. Her friends are all photographers and fashion people and stuff like that. And it's part of a whole scene that gels together. So how do you see the media's involvement with that?
So do you mean like the Scottish media, or just like...
I think the Scottish media and how we celebrate our own, and do we celebrate our own properly, or do we do ourselves down?
Yeah, so obviously Tenement TV does a brilliant job at celebrating Scottish artists, but I think there's a job to be done in the mainstream media, but there just aren't those music journalism jobs but artists getting coverage on Glasgow Live, is that really going to help them? It probably would. and there is a lack of coverage of these brilliant artists in the mainstream media in Scotland, I would say. So Tenement TV really does feel like it carries a bit of that burden and really singing about these artists from them just writing their first tune. Like the Snuts sent me a demo 4 or 5 years ago and we covered it, and it was a demo. So that doesn't really happen with a lot of other titles. So I think Tenement TV does, I think they do an important job at making sure that they do get that cut through. But yeah, definitely a job to be done in the mainstream, but there just aren't those jobs. There's just not that funding, I think.
There's an extent to which those jobs don't really exist anywhere as well. We know that all the broadsheets nationwide have been cutting their music journalism budgets, their arts coverage generally, and that's almost more out of a choice necessarily than what it exactly represents in the revenue as well. Because again, that is an example of something where people will do it anyway if you just let them. So they try and let the market sort of run. But even some of the online blogs that people are like read a lot, things like Line of Best Fit or even a magazine like The Fader or something, a lot of those take Drowned in Sound, which is gone now, because essentially by the end it was one person. And a lot of these big titles are like 2 or 3 people. I mean, the really small organizations, say those jobs don't exist in Scotland, they barely exist professionally in like a UK or international context. So perhaps there's an argument really to say there needs to be an infrastructure there that is able to earn in order to celebrate Scottish music, because, Robert, you had export figures there, right, for the UK music industry?
No.
Or at least from the same UK music thing, there are export figures anyway. It's £2.9 billion worth of music exports. And Scotland being able to make a big deal about its own artists really matters about how that reaches the world stage. Lewis Capaldi couldn't be a better example of that, and having that real base at home and how you can then go and celebrate at that, I think is something important. In these Brexity sort of times, and probably no one in this room, because we're involved in music, is very into having Brexit, and Scottish people don't tend to be very Brexity either. UK's international standing and Scotland's international standing, Scotland, UK, there's not that many things that we can say that we are actually the best in the world at, things that we are absolutely number one in world standing at. But when you've got just about the world's top selling artist in music coming from Bathgate, you can go, okay, right, Scotland is actually the best in the world at something. And the ways that we celebrate, I think, is it shouldn't be a challenge. It should be something that we should just do more and more of.
Definitely.
I think that's something that's been missing, though, like actually celebrating the music of where you come from. Probably going back to like when I started out, like we kind of kicked off in about 2006, 2007, and you just didn't really celebrate your own music. Like if you go to Manchester and you go to a bar, they celebrate music from that city. But I never really found that they had that in Scotland. They never really. And maybe it's like a West of Scotland thing, like you don't really celebrate and think you're good. You're not allowed to think you're good.
Totally.
So, but I think that's changing now. I think that's something now that, like, there's certain bars in Glasgow I can go into and they'll have Scottish bands on. And I think, and even like Tenement TV, that's fantastic. That's one of the only things doing that, and like things are definitely improving.
Well, maybe that's something where the economic and the cultural and the social kind of meet, actually, is where we're all in the same places, where the music industry is also part of how we go out, what we mean to each other. Music attaches to our emotions, and a lot of that is to do with our social, how we have groups of friends. That social element is really struggling right now whilst you can't go out to see a gig.
Yeah, it's not good.
Maybe I'm just inviting everyone in the room to start crying for a second. I mean, 100% of my income is gone, so I'm chief in charge of crying, I can tell you that. I just want someone to say something about Glasgow having this thing that surprisingly few people in Glasgow know about, which is Glasgow is registered as the UNESCO City of Music. That means something, right?
Robert, surely it's you that talks about the love of Glasgow. I'm an Edinburgh person living in Glasgow.
I mean, Glasgow bands go all the way back, don't they? I mean, we've got a huge lineage in Glasgow bands back in the days, from Edwyn Collins and Hugh and Crying all the way up. We've had a great relationship to, at that time, A&R and labels, and we're able to get quite actually a lot of press and celebration of Scottish bands then. And I think as the model has changed over the years, you know, we've probably suffered from market forces and how we're celebrating, but we're celebrating ourselves, aren't we? The SEA Awards help do that. We take some of our bands abroad to various showcases and celebrate our music in various nations and various genres, and we're well received. So I think that we have a long lineage when it comes to our Glasgow-based bands. Maybe Robert, you can talk about something that's a bit more current, because I've not lived in Glasgow for a wee while, so I'm also Edinburgh. Sorry.
I get talking about like being from Scotland and not having to go to England as well. Another, like the most recent example of that is an artist called Joseph. Don't know if you know Joseph. So I actually went to university with his manager and we became best mates, and it was just like, it was really interesting seeing the Joseph thing, because I went to his first gig in King Tut's and every single person in the room was A&R from London. And it was just like, it was nice to see that there was like demand for a Scottish artist. Do you know what I mean? And the thing is, Joseph wrote all those songs in his bedroom in Ballarnock, like he's for the East End of Glasgow. He had no training, he had nothing, but he's just got a spark. He's got something special. So that's like the most recent thing I can think of. Yeah, he's going to be massive.
The likes of like Tenement Trail, so obviously that happens in Glasgow, but that, like, we had the likes of Squid, who were like they are like Six Music, London, and they came up last year.
Brighton.
What's that? Oh, Brighton. I love Brighton. But they came up. It's just got this attraction, like pitching it to an agent, and you are like, this is happening. It's 10 venues, like 6 bands, 4,000 fans. Like, agents are just like, yes, because it's Glasgow. Like, Glasgow's just got that edge. It is just an incredible place. Like, I think Lewis Capaldi wishes he was from Glasgow, so he didn't have to say Bathgate, didn't he? So.
You've always got really cool bands at Tenement Trail, though. Like, there is always like a few gems who kind of break through after.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, we had like Sam Fender played twice before he even got big, and then like we had Lewis Capaldi back in the day. Like, yeah, we have like a good mix of like touring and Scottish. And last year we had Father Son as the headliner, which was their biggest ever gig, and that was just a lovely moment for everybody in that room. I think at the bar of that closing set. So yeah, no, Trail is a very special thing that we need to protect. So hopefully it comes back next year.
I just want to say that on a sort of, because I know these bits of the industry from live, tickets really sell in Glasgow. You know, if you wanted to put a UK tour on sale for a band, you would definitely make sure there was a stop in Glasgow, because you know that pretty much any band who are worth listening to, regardless of whether or not they're actually famous or not, is going to shift some tickets in Glasgow, because there's a normal social habit of buying tickets to go out and see gigs. If you wanted to put a ticket on sale and work out where it was going to sell, it'd sell tickets very easily in London, simply because of the size, Manchester because of that music culture, and then Glasgow. And Glasgow rivals Manchester, although the population is much, much smaller. I mean, much smaller. And it really is just to do with that. It's normal to go out and go to a gig.
Nick, to play into your backyard of running a venue, Glasgow's got a great venue ecology at all different levels. And you can see as a band starting out someplace, moving up to getting a bigger fan base to another place, and then going from that place to somewhere else. And so I think that people are living cheap but jowl with band members and going to see them. And so I think that kind of follows all the way up. I think that's why Glasgow has that UNESCO Site of Music, and also the genres are all represented. Classical, folk, jazz, electronica, you name it, rock, it's all there. So, you know, Glasgow has got a great musical ecology.
Talk about that cheek by jowl thing, you know, what those figures that we have don't represent is the amount of guest lists that are actually going out, the amount of people going to see their friends play for free, or, you know, or for pretty cheap, and it doesn't really register on the figures. I mean, Glasgow does support its own that way. We're getting that a wee bit in Edinburgh now. I mean, I can definitely say there's a scene around Sneaky Pete's, no question. And I'd love to hear a lot more about from other cities. You know, I'm the Scottish coordinator for all the grassroots music venues in Scotland, and there are loads of them, you know, and there are pockets of really wild scenes that I would actually like to know a lot more about. And it matters in each place that they have got the chance to build a culture that is as strong as what you get in Glasgow, because I think there's a social demand. There's great promoters called Beyond, and they do a lot of shows up in the Highlands, and they can, take, for instance, Laura Marling up on a tour of like 7 different venues, and some of them are churches and stuff. And all of these shows will sell out, some of them to really big venues as well. And the reason why is because people don't get enough quality shows up there. And I think, the agents, especially if they're based in London, think of these as like secondary or tertiary, or even what comes after tertiary, like fourth-tier ticketing markets. Like, oh, well, we couldn't possibly sell a ticket in Ullapool. Well, turns out you can really sell a ticket in Ullapool. And, it's a bit like Wayne's World. They say, if you book them, they will come. But it's true, if you put fantastic artists on sale prices, go on.
I did a Scottish tour in 2011, and it was like Wick and Hoyk,
yeah,
and Troon, and kind of all these kind of places where bands never go, but they had big town halls. Every single one was like sold out and packed, and I thought there'd be like 5 people there, like because it's not generally the places that people would go when they're on tour.
But those were the audience responses you really wanted to see as well. People who are like hungry for gigs because they're not getting enough.
Exactly. So I mean, there is definitely a market there for that within Scotland.
Yeah. I'm aware that there's some good questions piling up, but I want to plow on a wee bit. We haven't got that much time, amazingly. So I'm going to try and cover a couple of things. One of them might seem a bit like me talking, but at least let's see where I get to. Just because, so I've been engaging with government quite a lot on different levels, trying to fight for grassroots music venues to get proper funding during COVID. And I've really become aware of sort of the structure of how things are sitting, and from previous work that I've done the last couple of years as well. And it's really interesting how in Scotland, the arts, and I think in particular music, is kind of baked into the economy and how that all works. So for instance, the directorate that I talk to at government, the section of government where the civil servants I speak to, that's the directorate for culture, tourism, and major events. So that's really interesting. First of all, Scotland thinks about tourism and culture as very much being bound together. And so, Robert, when you had those figures about the level of music tourists that you have in Scotland, that really matters for how Scotland feels about itself. And this export question we had earlier, Scotland's exports are really done by the British Council, but Creative Scotland has got a role in that. And I know that Active Events have gotten the export thing that they do, but it doesn't feel like we've got something called Scotland sells music abroad, or Scotland brings people to Scotland for music. I don't know if that scheme and thing sort of exists. Perhaps anyone in the room knows a bit more about this, or how we can do it better.
Creative Scotland point of view, obviously when I used to work there, we did loads of showcasing, and so I guess that's us supporting the sector to showcase, because I know that for a lot of people it's expensive to take themselves there, but if we can take them as a collective, then we can showcase the music and hopefully pass on some of the leave behind, if you like, and therefore creates a bit of a fan base. In terms of what Lisa does with Showcase Scotland, that's absolutely fantastic what Lisa does. Oh my goodness. And I was privileged to be advocated to by her and be able to support what she does as well, because she really does explain the impact that it has around the world. But you're right, it's not like there's one Scottish music export office, and I think that might be something that would be worth a discussion.
You know what? There actually was one. So I found this out this week. This is a weird conversation because this is something I was speaking to someone about. So there used to be an international trade development officer from Scotland who would help to do showcases abroad. I think it was through Scottish Enterprise. And they've actually did away with that position. So there's no one there now to do that.
Well, really interesting answer just come in here from Robert in the chat here, saying that the SMIA is currently doing a feasibility study on that exact topic. I wonder why it is that I would bring it up. Also, you realize I've just conflated export and tourism, but I think you can understand why that is and what that is. Another element in government is that Fiona Hislop is a cabinet secretary, is like a minister, but higher. She's a cabinet secretary for the economy, fair work, and culture. And she sees relationships between all those things being there as well. So culture is a driver of the economy, not just through tourism. The way that she sees it is that also within culture, there should be fair work. And that means that people should get paid properly as well. Now, it's very particular in Scotland that we have to work with consequentials, which is basically our share of the UK budget in order to make some of these things work. So I think there could and should potentially be, Scotland having much stronger threads of arts funding available to it, but Scotland can only spend the portions of its budget that it chooses to do. Does anyone in the room feel like they know exactly what they would do with more arts funding? I know it's a broad question, but Scotland values culture, right? So, and it values it in economic terms. So go on, spend my money. I'll be the treasury for a second. I'll be Rishi Sunak.
Yeah,
what are you going to do?
It's creating those jobs, isn't it? And I suppose it's ensuring that those jobs are available. Like, I think that it's ensuring as well that people are aware of how to fulfill a sort of career in music. And there is a worry that that could be an issue for people coming out of school, going into college and stuff. So I think, like, if there was additional funding, I think it definitely needs to be within the sort of jobs available, because there aren't a lot.
Probably supplement what Nadine is saying with a Scottish music television channel or a Scottish music arts channel. That's probably how I would spend my money, and I would look at innovation and hybridizing and digital pivot and how you monetize this new model of how we consume and enjoy and create our art and music, theatre and dance and so forth. So I think I'd probably look to that as a method, if you like, to do not just an economic, social and cultural thing, but to actually get back to what you were saying about celebration, awareness and jobs. The whole thing could be a congruent industry, but I think that's something we haven't as yet tackled.
Caroline, that doesn't sound like something you've just come up with on the spot. I've
been banging on about it for 10 years, and I've had a couple of opportunities to say to Miss Hislop and others this idea, but obviously it can't. Anything that happens has to be a pact of the willing. It's a jigsaw of people coming together at the right time, right conditions to make something like that happen. And so, of course, I can bang on about it, but you need all the things to fall into place.
I'll give you the money. That's fine. You can have it.
That's exactly what I would say. It's about strengthening the infrastructure, because it's a whole ecosystem of all different things that work together. So you need to strengthen the whole thing, or else it will just fall down. So that
put the music and film industry better together in animation and games, so you've got a better relationships with people who could commission you to compose, perform, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't let me go on and on.
No, I mean, listen, if you're going to talk about animation and games, things like that as well, I think it's really important to remember that Scotland is, I mean, it really is that Scotland is a hive of world activity in computer games, for instance. And Scotland does a very strong film sector. And Scottish artists are making a lot of money out of sync. I share my office with a record label called Lucky Me Records. They've got Hudson Mohawks on the label. They put out records by Rusty. They did a record by Bauer, who's the guy who did the Harlem Shake. And all these guys make their money from sync in a really big way. Some streaming, a little bit of physical through their Warp Records connection. But like when you get a track onto Grand Theft Auto, which comes from Scotland, it's a big deal. So it's very interesting to see how Scotland can innovate to make sure that these things link up as well, so that Scottish artists are getting paid out of Scottish computer games, that sort of thing.
Scottish artists also getting commissioned for Scottish adverts.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's all sorts of things. I'm wondering, does Scotland's corporate economy support its Scottish cultural economy? Graphic design, architect, right? It goes right all the way through. We need a little bit more support and cohesion, I think, across the piece.
Really nice point here from Paul Quinn here, who's saying that success inspires the grassroots, and it's true. It's about championing and supporting things, but also as they come up. And I think Scotland does quite well about having a bottom-up structure where because we're small, we can very quickly recognize talent and then see what we can do to develop those into careers pretty fast. But also, I think, and say Lewis or Young Fathers are both very good examples of this, is that because an artist doesn't have to make it big straight away, you can be bubbling around in Scotland with everyone knowing you're good without having to decide to be a big deal until you feel you're really ready to do it. And then you go ahead and make that leap, Especially if you're in Edinburgh, where people notice less. In Glasgow, they notice, and actually, sometimes in Glasgow, that can be a problem. People notice really early if someone's good, and suddenly they all want to book the artist, and the artist maybe isn't quite ready yet,
To be honest, I was playing the songs for my first record for about a year and a half in Glasgow, like Geraldine, Daddy's Gone, and there was no dinner at the gig. So, I mean, I guess if there was, maybe they still wouldn't have liked it. I don't know, but yeah. So I kind of do one thing where it takes a while to kind of bubble up, even if you're ready.
I get pretty close to answer some questions that have come across. I wanted to at least point out, because I've still got my government fact sheet, I printed out my own fact sheet. Scotland's got a thing which is unique in the UK and almost unique amongst countries, and it's got a thing called a national performance framework. This is a list of things that Scotland thinks that it should have in order to be good. And culture is on it. And you can definitely take music into this. The aspirations within the National Performance Framework are things that create a more successful country, give opportunities to people, increase their well-being, create sustainable inclusive growth, and reduce inequalities. So they've got national indicators which are for culture. And the things that they want to happen in culture are not just, because it's not just economic factors. It's not like, oh, well, the national GDP needs to be this. It's actually about the well-being of people and sustainable thing and making Scotland a place that we want to have in future. National indicators of Scotland doing well are attendance at cultural events or places of culture, participation in cultural activity, the growth of the cultural economy, and people working in the arts of culture. So lots of it is to do with people's involvement, and then the economic thing also exists. I was going to try and spend some time talking about music education, how that links in, but I don't know if we're going to have very much time there. But I just feel like music is imbued throughout Scottish culture. And yeah, like Caroline says, it's...
Yeah, sorry, Nick, I was just going to say, you're right. I mean, if you were talking about highly skilled people, Martin Parker the other day, he's an educator at ECA in music. He said that people start kind of playing music in single digits, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know when I got handed a violin, but it was not when I wanted it. It was much later. I was like playing drums and piano, and then I got forced to play the violin, but ended up being a singer. But I mean, you're in single digits when you start playing an instrument potentially, and so it's highly skilled, and you're encouraged through school to play an instrument. And Youth Music Initiative has been around for 15 years, I think, and so it's well invested in by Creative Scotland. The Scottish Government sees that as a value and actually delegates the funding to Creative Scotland to then distribute. So it's embedded in Scottish Government's thought process that music is something that's part of our culture, our expression as a human, and it's something you should enjoy throughout life, regardless of whether you make it your job or not. And I think you can see that through community choirs as well, people loving and enjoying that, and then the role of music in therapy. And so I think music is just imbued right through our society and culture. And I love that the government sees that and it's inside the framework.
With that in mind, I'm going to try and jump around to some questions. And Caroline, that's very, feel very inspired, feel ready to go.
Yeah.
But earlier on, and I think he's probably still here because actually almost everyone who started with us is still here, which is great. Jamie Loughlin asked a question which I might have to paraphrase. Basically, he's saying that Scottish Government gave all of its money to everything except for grassroots music venues and rock and roll. Jamie, if I'm paraphrasing wrong, you let me know.
This question earlier, and it gets down into the reason why public funding is required. And so I think the question was around a lot of the music going to classical and orchestra, etc., and less to commercial music. And I think that the clue is in the word commercial, and then it gets back into a very philosophical debate about what we provide public funding for and what it requires, so that all genres of music are available to the audience of Scotland, and some genres have a commercial model and some less commercial. And I don't really think it's an easy debate to have right now, unfortunately.
No, it's going to take a lot of unpacking. What I will say is that open letter, I co-wrote it. So I can say that at this point, with a lot of what's happened with COVID funding, is that we know that Scottish government and Creative Scotland now really understand the value of grassroots music venues and grassroots music generally, that they've wanted to invest really well into artists and the grassroots, and that we feel like there is a bit of a change there. In particular, what they've recognized is that this bit which is called commercial, especially at the grassroots level, is actually essentially not for profit. And that so much of gig venues is driven by alcohol sales. You know, you have to have a busy bar to be a busy venue to survive. You have to have a nightclub doing student nights or something attached to your live music venue, depending on where you are, in order for you yourselves to have a successful commercial model. And with the amount of drinking that's going on decreasing, youth trends are that people want much higher standards of facilities, and they're not really going out to get pissed quite as much, which is a shame. And this is Scotland, but you know, I feel like the music part of the culture is going to have to fight, and that ticket prices will have to go up to make that happen. But also we think that investment needs to come up from sort of the Creative Scotland sort of end and that sort of thing as well. It's a really interesting chat that I was given the other day. And I talked to a guy called Simon Frith. I haven't got time to go into Simon Frith, but Simon Frith is a famous music academic, and he's also the chair of the judges of the Mercury Music Prize. And he lives in Edinburgh, or he did until recently, where he taught. And he had been telling me before that, you know, when rock and roll started, it was all in cafes. Not a lot of gig venues as we know them now, because it didn't really exist in that sense. It was back rooms of pubs, but the alcohol wasn't a really big part of the mix at all. Similarly, if you had to go and see the Beatles at the Cavern, I got this figure given to me the other day, the Cavern didn't even have an alcohol license at the time, and people didn't really bring their own booze. There was a certain amount of cheap speed going around for sure, and that helped rock and roll at the start. But the accounting for inflation, the ticket price to see the Beatles at the Cavern was £37 in today's money. Now your gig ticket is £10 for a local gig if it's an expensive local gig. So perhaps the future lies with some funding from Creative Scotland and elsewhere, and we can see that there is a trend that that's going to start happening a wee bit, but also that we think that if people are going to spend a little bit less money on booze, they have to start spending that money on the musicians, because the venues won't be able to run any other way. I'm all for higher artist fees, by the way. I think everyone is. Perhaps anyone else can pick out a question that they want to have. There's a question about better funding for education, support for those in the industry who aren't musicians. That's all in one. Samantha, I don't know if I can really pull that all out in one go. But I think we would probably say yes. We'd probably say the whole ecology wants to get more, right? I think that's something we've discussed probably at length. Does anyone else want to pick out a question that we've got?
I'm just trying to read them.
Yeah.
They're like bad questions.
There's one that mentions Tenement TV from Mobo Agoro towards the bottom, Nadine, so maybe you can have that one.
I'm trying to read like 5 things. Oh no, wait, sorry, somebody's written now.
What can organizations do to use their resources to further aid scenes which are coming up and experiencing their acts making the jump from London due to lack of access in Scotland? So I feel like actually that's something we did talk about quite a lot, but Medina, maybe you can give us a short minute on how Tenement TV makes things really happen in Scotland and makes artists want to stay here.
So yeah, I think it's all about us giving coverage to artists that are incredible, no matter the size, no matter the genre. It is just based on the fact that it's a great tune or it's a great artist, and I think we never give a bad review. Now that's quite controversial. People might not agree with that, might not like that, but we just wouldn't cover it if we weren't a fan of it. I just feel like the damage done to negatively pick apart artists that are, you know, really just trying to start out is just not worth it. And it's not something that we support. So, and I think generally people that work at Tenement TV, a lot of it is done for the love of it. So we've all got about 100 other jobs, and we just absolutely bloody love it, and that's why we do it. So yeah, I think just the more the merrier in the industry, and I think it's a really collaborative industry in Scotland, and long may that continue.
Without picking out a specific question on it, I wanted to get some final words on music industry post-COVID. And what one thing that you think you could do to build back better? Let's start with Caroline and see how we go.
Well, I've been looking at the hybrid model whilst at the university, and thinking about the power of 5G, and I'm not going to get into 5G COVID hysteria. So it's all about, can we hybridize the model? If through COVID we have developed more of a taste for the enjoying of music via this medium, and hopefully in the future you can sit with your friends and enjoy it, so it's a little bit more social. How can we make a hybrid model carry on? Because for some people, geographically or with disability or sickness or hospital or care home or wherever you might be, being able to access music in this way has been a joy to many. Can we carry on with that model whilst we go back to live? And can that be a reasonable value ticket to make that a viable additional second strand option? So I've been looking at that, and in the mobile 5G technology, and also live streaming in VR. So yeah, I'm looking at that kind of aspect of things.
I think I'll just quickly say for 2021, I think 2020 has taught me personally to be resilient and to remain positive and to keep on keeping on. There's nothing else for it, and I think it is just all about celebrating what we have and keeping the faith. So as fluffy as that is, that's that's what I'm going to leave on.
I agree. I think that's the thing. Like, if anybody's heard anybody that said, "Oh, I'm giving in, I've packed it in, I've went to another job," nobody's said that, because that's not going to happen. So things are going to come back just as good, if not better, than they were. But I think maybe, it would be good if a few things could change down the line, just to support in case it happens again. Maybe reinvestment in the industry from other sectors.
Holly doesn't seem to be cutting us off, which is great. So I'm going to say something along the lines of, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, and suddenly people have lost it for a second, and we really feel strongly that they will be back there.
Hi there. So is everyone said everything that they're looking to say? Yeah.
That's not what we're like as people, I'm afraid.
No problem. Well, we better wrap it up anyway, because we have Amol Talwar's keynote speech happening in a few minutes over in the stage section. That is called Progress and Profit Through Diversity. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists here for such an interesting discussion about the value of the music industry. I think we've all got a lot to think about now. Yes, and thank you everyone for watching so much. We've had such a great time at Resonate, and I really hope you have too. So if you all fancy heading over and watching Amol Talwar's keynote speech, and I'll see you all soon.
And I just really want to say that Paul Quinn has said about inclusion and access for everyone, regardless of financial, geographic, etc. That's a great one for the next panel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Robert. Bye.